This video is brought to you by Squarespace. Recently, I've been working a lot on my digital painting skills, but without all of the flexibility that digital tools afford me, can my traditional painting skills actually keep up? I'm a lot less experienced whenever it comes to traditional painting. I've only really gotten back into acrylic painting within the last like 5 years or so. I also tend to gravitate towards painting the faces of single characters on a page, not usually putting them in any kind of scene with a background, so depth and separation usually isn't even a factor whenever I traditional paint. There's a lot of things that I need to work on whenever it comes to traditional painting, and I do want as much as possible for my painting skills to translate whenever I'm not using digital software. So today, we are going to get out of my comfort zone a little bit. How far out of my comfort zone, I hear you asking? I bought the largest painting canvas that they sold at the local craft store. If I fail, if this is bad, there's no hiding from it. There's no getting far away from this to hide the details. The details in this will be on full display and all of its 36 by 48 glory. This video also serves dual purposes because this painting is actually going to be a surprise gift for my partner, because apparently it's really hard to find giant full concept art style fantasy paintings that aren't just AI nonsense. I've been trying to find one for him for a while now, and eventually I just said, you know what? I'm gonna do it myself. For once, AI is forcing someone to learn a skill. Of course, as always, I have already assembled a mood board on Pinterest of the general vibes that I'm going for this illustration. I think concept art is really the key word here. I really want it to be like a grand, high fantasy, epic feeling concept art type painting. I really want it to feature a lot of depth and distant mountains and probably a castle as the focal point. Also, kind of want it to include a body of water sort of used as an element to lead the viewer's eye towards the castle. Maybe some dragons flying around the castle as if they're either guarding it or about to attack. And then also a little protagonist in the foreground, kind of showing someone on their way to the castle, going to slay a dragon, intervening in some way. I don't know. I'd like to have a little guy in my illustrations to show depth and also add some storytelling in there. So of course in my inspo boards I have a lot of like concept art from ArtStation. Once again, desperately trying to find things that aren't AI to reference. Hopefully I did a good job there. Anyways, with all of those different elements in mind, let's go and tackle some thumbnails.
For the thumbnails, I didn't want to go too crazy. I just ended up exploring 4 different concepts, each one generally following the format that I was talking about, using a rule of thirds type grid for the composition, with the castle lying on one of the thirds and the point of reference character lying on the other. Here I was really trying to play around with different lighting and value schemes to try to lead the eye in an interesting way. I was also trying to keep in mind what I think I'm actually capable of in traditional mediums. I wanted to keep things mostly to atmospheric perspective because perspective is something that I struggle with even in digital mediums, and I wanted to mostly use the lighting as a tool to portray depth. I also played around with the idea of the knight being on a horse, not on a horse. I played around with different ways to add the dragons in. I just wanted to make it as interesting and cool as possible, but still something within the realm of possibility of what I am capable of. And I do think my ideas for the thumbnails ultimately improved over the course of working on these.
Hello. I have tackled said thumbnails. Once I finished these, I shared them to my Patreon on a poll to see if they can help me decide which one to actually do or which elements to try to combine into like a solid concept for this painting. I definitely had a thumbnail in mind that I liked the most, and I was sort of hoping that my patrons would also choose that one. And if we scroll down, we can see overwhelmingly they agree. I think the 4th one is definitely the coolest. It has the most interesting composition. It has like cool lighting scheme that I think I can really play around with. And I also love the idea of the protagonist sort of arriving on this bridge on horseback. I think it has the strongest storytelling and also the most interesting composition. For the most part, I think this is the concept that I'm going to go with for this painting. With all that planning out of the way, I now need to begin roughing in this painting. But before we get painting, if you're an artist in need of an online gallery to display your beautiful illustrations, look no further than this video's sponsor, Squarespace. I host my portfolio website on Squarespace, and it is incredibly easy to set up and maintain. You can begin by choosing from a huge selection of flexible website templates, and from there you can customize every aspect of your website, from colors to textiles to website graphics. And their drag and drop website builder fluid engine makes it super easy to structure your website however you'd like adding custom pages specific to your brand or pages to detail specific projects. And tools like automatic image scaling mean you can keep your portfolio galleries updated with the click of a button. Plus, if you sell your work, Squarespace also offers an e-commerce platform that can be linked directly to your portfolio site, which offers a huge selection of features for sellers who manufacture their own goods or sell in person at conventions. But if you're on the busier side like me and you do not have time to manufacture your own merchandise or go through a different manufacturer, you can use Squarespace's custom merch feature to handle your goods, and their print-on-demand service will handle inventory, production, and shipping for you. And their wide variety of flexible payment options makes buying even more accessible for your customers. So if you're in the market for your own website, online store, or portfolio, head to squarespace.com for a free trial, and when you're ready to launch, head to squarespace.com/pricklyalpaca to save 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain. Thank you so much to Squarespace for sponsoring this video and hosting my portfolio. Now let's get back to it. Hello, welcome back. I've changed into my comfy clothes as to better be able to focus on the painting experience. First, let me apologize if there's any wobbliness during this process, because this is not the most secure tripod in the world. I've really had to rig up some nonsense in the back. Let me disrobe this canvas. So I think I'm going to start out this piece by doing an underpainting using predominantly warm tones, because I think the final piece I want to have mostly cool tones, like blues, greens, that sort of thing. I'm decently confident with the underpainting stage of a painting like this, so I think I'm just gonna get in there and start carving out some shapes. So this is what we've got so far for the underpainting. So far, I think it's going pretty good. The main thing that I was worried about was capturing a lot of the same shapes and proportions as the original thumbnail sketch, especially since I think this canvas is actually like a little bit narrower in terms of proportion than my original thumbnail. It's a little bit taller, but I don't think it's a bad thing. One thing I am worried about is generally trying to get like the values right. It's something that I've been struggling a lot with recently, even in digital, and in this format, I don't have a very reliable way of checking that sort of thing. So I just have to really pay a lot of attention to it going forward, especially whenever it comes to the castle that is supposed to go about right here. I basically want some light coming in like over the valley and shining on top of the castle and hitting a couple of these peaks in the background to kind of make this more of a focal point. So that means that this area is going to be a good bit lighter in value than everything else, but I don't want to make it like bright white. So I need to make sure I'm continuing to plant that in a relative way so that I can use white to make certain details pop later on towards the end of the piece. I am also definitely concerned about like getting my horse and little knight guy correct down here. And what I'm thinking I might do is maybe create a stencil and then airbrush the outline on so that I can make sure the silhouette is nice and crisp and I don't have to worry too much about proportions or messing up what's underneath this. It just seems like a more practical way to go about doing that. That way I don't have to worry about it so much. The executive producer, as usual, is overseeing my progress and accuracy, and so far so good, I guess. So next, I think the main order of business is trying to actually get a decent silhouette in here for the castle and start detailing that a little bit. Hopefully get something a little bit more nailed down here. I've got some white and some brown here that I'm kind of going to use as a gray mixing tone, and I'm gonna go in. The main thing I sort of want to get across here is an interesting silhouette. Is that anything so far? Okay, so this is where I am at the end of the first night. I think the general forms are coming together. I have most everything roughed in. The castle is getting a little bit more detail. I think I have a couple more things to tweak in terms of the composition. For example, I feel like the focal point of the castle could be a little bit more pronounced. I really want the viewer's eye drawn here, and I think the bridge is competing with that just a little bit, so I kind of want to figure that out. I also do think the two large rock formations on either side of the composition need to be a little bit darker, so I want to bring those values down as I begin to paint in everything. I also think I make the bottom a little darker, bring the sky down a little bit, that way we can really focus the viewer's attention here, because right now it's feeling a little bit too like tall. So I still have a couple of adjustments to make before I go in and actually begin painting everything, but for right now I'm going to sleep on it, that way I can collect my thoughts and come back fresh tomorrow. So I will see you guys then.
Collect my thoughts I did, and my thoughts led me directly to not wanting to traditionally draw a horse. So I decided to go with the plan that I mentioned earlier and try making a stencil digitally. And I'm really glad I did, because this horse gave me so much trouble even digitally, and I think I had to redraw the horse and rider like 4 times before I got something I was sort of happy with. And that's with the goal of just having a decent looking silhouette, so you can only imagine what a pain this is going to be to paint. I don't know yet, I haven't done it, but here's some not so subtle foreshadowing for you. Anyways, whenever I was done with the stencil, I snatched a giant piece of watercolor paper, and to make the stencil, instead of trying to print it or something, I just held that piece of watercolor paper up to my fancy LED monitor, traced a rough silhouette over it, and then cut that bad boy out.
Horse. This took me an embarrassingly long amount of time to do. I'm thinking all I'm gonna do is grab some trusty masking tape, stick the stencil on here, and just stipple paint inside of this. Definitely a little messy, but overall not bad. I fully expect to need to go in and clean up some of the edges on this, but I think it's a really good representation of where this horseman should go in the piece, so that's what I was looking for. That's good.
So much time trying to get the composition and underpainting right. Day 2 was really about just trying to rough in all of the approximate colors and really just get the base of what the painting is going to eventually be down. I spent a couple of minutes racking my brain to figure out what kind of color scheme I wanted to go with before realizing that I pretty much had to go with sunset colors given how I wanted the light in the painting to be. Originally, I had planned on this painting being a little bit more cool toned, but at least a sunset gave me a decent selection of reference photos to work with. However, given that this painting is straight out of my imagination and I'm not working with any direct reference here whatsoever, I definitely had a difficult time approximating some of the colors and wrapping my head around what some of the values would be with this particular lighting scheme. There was a lot of guesswork here in trying to roughly use color theory to try to figure out how certain tones would look in this lighting. In the end, I kind of Frankensteined a couple of reference photos together, experimented a little bit by just putting colors down to see how they would look with everything, and just generally trusting my artistic eye. In the end, I don't think it was too terribly difficult to figure out once I studied some references enough, and while I was at it, I also did a good bit of work painting in the castle.
After another day of work, this is what we got so far. I feel like this is both a lot of progress and also not a ton of progress for like 2 days of work, but this is a giant painting, so I don't know exactly what I was expecting. I think for the most part, so far so good. I'm really happy with the color palette that's happening so far. I think like my main goal, trying to make the castle illuminated and vibrant, is going pretty well for the most part. The underpainting really helped with that, so I'm glad that I spent so much time trying to get that right. It's taken a long time to figure out what the rest of all the other colors are going to be, especially the ones that are happening here in shadows, but I think I'm arriving at a good place. I'm working on it. I'm figuring it out slowly. It's just trust the process, as usual.
And now time for the part of the video I like to call Kira's Nitpicks.
Number 1, the perspective of the castle is really janky and sort of weird. I especially like this area. It doesn't really look right for the angle that I've chosen, and I'm debating painting it over, make the perspective work a little bit better. Also, on a similar note, I think now I feel like the castle might be a little bit too big in the overall composition. It's sort of enormous in this range of mountains that are also supposed to be enormous. I just feel if it was like a little smaller, the scale of the piece would feel a lot more grand. I just don't feel like it makes sense in the brain with how big it is now. And I have at this point even started going in and adding same details, so that's... Can you see the tiger? You can't see the tiger. I also at this point have been working with paint that is not very good quality. It is neither very opaque nor very pigmented. It's been working okay, but it just means that I have to work in like a lot of layers so that I don't run out of paint. So I also have purchased some Winsor & Newton acrylic paints that are a little bit more pigmented that are supposed to arrive tomorrow. And I've also purchased some thick body titanium white. Maybe it'll make some of my lightening up values go a little faster, because oh boy, right now the white I'm using is literally from Dollar General. So I have child quality white paint that I'm working with for this, and it is terrible. It smells like a citronella candle. Why? Did I mention I might also be coming down with a cold? That's a fun little development. Anyways, I'm gonna sleep on it for now, collect my thoughts, try to make a single decision in my entire life, and I will commune with you all on day 3.
Of course, I couldn't help myself, and I did end up painting over that entire castle.
So I have been painting over stuff. I've also been trying to make like the depth of the piece sell a little bit more. I feel like there wasn't enough separation between this plane and this plane, so I've been trying to like make them disappear into the background a little bit more. I've also been painting some detail into the foreground, and I'm pretty happy with how that's starting out so far. And as luck has it, my new higher quality acrylic paints came just in time. I mostly ordered these because they were on sale, but I got some thick body titanium white.
Titanium white, titanium white, titanium white, and some titanium white.
And a Winsor & Newton set that's actually a lot bigger than I expected it to be. This was on sale for like $30. Hopefully, with the help of these new paints, layering up some of the pigmentation will not take nearly as long, because right now I'm running out of paint. Also, update, I do definitely have a cold. I didn't sleep last night and then fell asleep at 6:30 a.m. and woke up around 1. So my brain doesn't know what the heck is going on right now. Will the delirium result in a better painting? Stay tuned to find out. I certainly hope so.
Titanium white.
Oh yeah. And the producer is trying to steal my chair. Thank you for that.
I was going to originally leave these mountains a little bit more plain, but I ultimately decided that I wanted to add some little hints of light falling on the mountains and some snow and some mountain rivers flowing into the valley because of the presence of so many waterfalls in this painting. So of course I had to go and do all of that before adding the castle back in. This was honestly kind of difficult for me. For some reason, I've always had a struggle trying to paint detail and form into mountains, which is a little baffling because ultimately they're kind of just shapes. And even here, I was working with a really limited color palette because everything is supposed to be in red tones. So I don't know why they gave me so much trouble, but I did struggle to do this in a way that didn't look kind of stupid. I think that detail ended up looking okay, especially since they're supposed to be so far away and they're not really the focus of the painting. And of course, while I was at it, I couldn't resist the urge of adding just a little bit more foreground detail to the piece. Specifically, even more waterfalls, and don't worry, those aren't even the last waterfalls that I'll end up adding to the piece.
This is how we're looking right now. I'm a lot happier with how all the colors and the depth is working. So now let's paint that castle back in.
Of this painting, I knew that this castle definitely ran the risk of making little to no sense since I'm not someone who knows a ton about the construction and usefulness of castles. I've definitely learned about some of the different structures and battlements in the past, but not enough to make up a whole castle off the top of my head. So since I knew that I wanted this castle to at least make some sense structurally and not just be a fantasy nightmare,
I'm not really going for realism here, but I do want it to make at least a little bit more sense.
I made sure to gather lots of real-life reference onto my mood boards and even collected a few diagrams on the functionality of real-life castles that look sort of like this. Of course, there's still a fair amount of fantasy nonsense happening here, so it's not going to be perfect, but I wanted to try my best to base this in some form of reality. It should also come as no surprise to any of you that putting down a rough sketch first helped this process along tremendously. I'm not sure why I didn't do that in the first place, but I don't think painting the initial castle was a complete waste because it gave me a lot of information on ways I could improve the process of painting this, and it also gave me a lot of good information about my color mixing and some of the shadows that I was using. Painting this as a second draft went a lot better than it did the first time, and I'm way happier with the scale and the amalgamation of details I decided to include. So doing that first rough draft was a bit of a happy accident. I'm also a lot less intimidated by the idea of painting buildings traditionally after doing this, because the color mixing capability of traditional paint gives you so much more tonal variation to the point where you can use a really simple color scheme to paint something like this, and the color mixing and variation will create a lot of that tonality for you. I usually have to struggle a lot to simulate that type of thing digitally, so it was a refreshing part of the traditional process. We've done it. We've managed to paint a pretty decent castle, and I'm genuinely shocked. End of day 3, I am so much happier with how this is going. I feel like it's really coming together. I'm mostly in the rendering stage, which is what I like to do. But I am going to go to bed now. Hello, it's day 4, and day 4 is about making some dang progress. I have most of this piece mapped out at this point. Most of the values are dialed in. I like how it's liking. I like the colors. So now it is just about obsessive amounts of detail, which just so happens to be my favorite part of the entire process. However, as much as I like obsessive amounts of detail, I do want to be careful about what I detail so that it's not like competing with focal points. So I want to focus most of the detail on the foreground here, on the rider and the horse, and on the castle. Those are the areas that I want people to look at. So the stuff on the outskirts of the piece, it's gonna get a little bit of detail, but I'm not gonna go too crazy with it because it's not necessary. Let's try to make some progress. Well, sleeping on the job. Adding detail on the piece this day began by giving the bridge more of a cobblestone texture. I did this by first making the silhouette a little bit more rocky and jagged, and the aforementioned paint mixing made it easy to go in there and just add blobs of tone, which made it basically just look like a rock texture. This ended up looking really painty and nice. I think it sold the effect really well. I also couldn't help but add even more foreground detail to the grassy part. This consisted mostly of adding more grass and plant texture to areas the light was hitting, adding more reflections to the rocks, adding more color variation to the patches of grass, and I added similar variation with less amounts of detail to the two planes framing the canvas. I also added more detail to the waterfalls and to the reflections in the main body of water, and just generally added detail wherever I think it needed it. This is a very disorganized part of the process, and I'm really letting my intuition guide me here. Hello, and welcome to the last day. Last night, I did my best to detail as much of this piece as I possibly could, but seeing as how I've been staying up way too late recently, and I'm also sick, I went head empty pretty fast, so I still have a little bit of detailing left to do today, and I decided to save a lot of that for fresh eyes. So the main things on the itinerary for today, some foreground detail. I feel like especially this area and some stuff around the bridge could use a lot more detail to like pull the eye and really make all the other stuff kind of vanish into the background. And then we also have to work out the matter of the horse and rider and the dragons, which are kind of like make or break elements for this piece. I'm at least a little scared. There's an awful lot of glare going on right now, but I did try to detail the silhouette of the horse and rider a little bit last night. I didn't really like how it was coming out last night, and with fresh eyes, I don't really like how it looks either. So I have created Another stencil. What happened to the first one, you might ask? Don't worry about it. She's no longer with us. This one is better because it also has cleaner edges. I actually cut it out with an X-Acto knife instead of scissors. So I think I'm gonna paint over this, apply the stencil again. Listen, some of you might not notice a difference here, but I do. And that's what's important. So let's fix that. My dragons, I ended up sketching them in with a washable marker. That way, if I didn't like how it was looking, I could just wipe it away with a damp cloth. I also based the poses on my original thumbnail because I still liked how those looked. And once I was happy with my sketches and poses, I went in with a dark burnt umber brown for the dragon that's looming on the mask to the side, since it's a little bit more in shadow, and with predominantly red tones for the two dragons that are flying in midair, since I think some light would probably be hitting them.
Just like this morning, just dreaming like I switched to high gear.
Finishing up this piece was pretty straightforward, but once again, all over the place and pretty unfocused. I'm mostly just adding more detail, more like visual mileage in places where the light is hitting and where I think it would look nice. I'm trying to add some detail inside of the silhouette of the knight and rider, because even though this is mostly in shadow and silhouetted, a little bit of light would still get in there and reveal some of those forms. But while I work on this, I do want to talk about how I think it's funny that I went about this process in a way that was pretty influenced by my digital art background. Just like using a stencil so that I can basically use a makeshift lasso tool to add the horse and rider, using a washable marker to roughen the silhouettes of the dragon so that I can basically erase them with a damp cloth if I don't like how they're looking, using the underpainting and white in general as almost a layer mask where I can add like washes of color on top of it. I don't know, I think it just helped me be a little bit more creative with this process in a way that combated some of my weaknesses with traditional art. And I just think that's fun because even though this is a wholly traditional piece, I did utilize a lot of digital tools and tricks in the process of making it. And I think it definitely made the piece a lot stronger in the end. At this point in the evening, I was admittedly getting a little loopy, and I decided to make a bold choice. The painting in this state very easily could have been done. I'm not sure why I wasn't satisfied with it. Looking at it now, I think it looks pretty good. But at the time, I was just not happy with how the detail on the horse was coming out, so I had the interesting idea to cheat the lighting in the painting a little bit and make the intense sunset lighting hit the rider and the horse to make them stand out more. I did this by first painting in the lighting in white to bring the values way up, and then going over that once it was dry with a wash of reds and oranges. I tried to use a similar technique on the sky in a few areas of the dragons that I also wasn't happy with, but in that area, I just couldn't seem to get it right, and I did end up muddying up the colors even more. I eventually arrived at a place that I was decently happy with for both the riders and sky, but I do think if I had left it at this stage, it would have been just fine. Which stage do you prefer? Tell me whether or not I messed up in the comments below. Anyways, I finished the painting off by painting all of the sides so they weren't left just white, signed my name in the bottom right hand corner, Bob Ross style, and sealed the entire thing with a couple of layers of acrylic clear. And with that, my giant fantasy painting is all done, and it is time for the reveal.
to the end of the video and to the finished painting. All in all, I'm pretty dang happy with how it came out, but obviously I still have a handful of critiques that I'm going to take forward in my other traditional painting endeavors. I'm never going to like improve enough in one painting to really make a significant amount of difference, so this is definitely going to be like an ongoing process for trying to get better at traditional art alongside digital art. But I do think a couple of things sort of got lost along the process of this painting. I still am really not satisfied with how the sky turned out, and I think that was mostly the result of like trying to paint over things a couple of times. I think painting over the castle the first time and not being careful enough with the sky did muddy up the colors a little bit up there, and I think as a consequence trying to fix the clouds on top of that later on just made the colors muddier and muddier since they didn't have that like bright layer shining through from the underpainting. So that's something sort of just to keep in mind in terms of process with future traditional paintings, because layers in the order in which you do things do really matter with traditional painting, especially if you're trying to get that translucent effect from like the opacity of the paint. In a similar vein, I think making the underpainting so dark in a couple of areas, specifically like on the sides with those two masses, did end up like shooting me in the foot a little bit later on, because since they were so dark, it was really difficult to then try to brighten those areas up with some greens. I had to layer a lot, and in the end, I still think like the colors are not nearly as vibrant as they could be, especially in the foreground. I had to layer up the green paint a lot to get that little bright spot of grass where the light is kind of shining through. So I think a lot of it is just due to the fact that I haven't painted like this a whole lot traditionally whenever I've done landscape paintings, it's mostly been like the Bob Ross method. So I'm very used to that process and not so used to a process where you go from an underpainting where you plan things out to a finished product. So I wasn't being as aware of the effects of my colors as I probably could have been, because once you go that dark with an underpainting, it is much more difficult to go as light as that bright white canvas that you started out with, and like the vibrancy of just the pigment layered on top of that. Something I'm also not super happy with is like the size of my dragons that are actually around the castle. I think they turned out like a little bit too big. I probably should have scaled them down a little bit once again to really show the scale of the castle, but I think you could also like chalk that up to them being a little bit closer to the viewer than I originally intended. But that's another like size relativity thing that I need to keep in mind whenever I'm doing these types of paintings where I can't undo very easily at all. That being said, I do think my stencil trick with the horse and rider in the foreground really helped me. I don't think it would have came out as well if I didn't do that. I do think it was really tricky to add detail since it's in the foreground and I was detailing most of the foreground elements. I couldn't leave it as vague as I was originally intending. I was really just gonna have it be a silhouette at first with maybe a tiny little bit of detail in there. But as I tried to do that, it just didn't look right, and my values on that side also got a little bit muddied up from the fact that I made that mass a little bit too dark. So in order to make the horse and rider stand out, I did add some very bold lighting in there, which I do think is an interesting visual choice, but it really does make the reds a lot more prominent in this piece than I originally intended. It also breaks logic a lot in terms of how the light would be coming in and hitting everything, because it's not hitting the two masses on the side. Like it was a really artistic choice for me to go in and do that. While I do think it looks significantly better, it makes the horse and rider stand out a lot more. It does like break the logic a little bit, but you know what? It's fine. It's sort of like active problem solving for a painting like this. It's just one of those things that, again, I need to plan out a little bit better whenever I make something like this. I really like how the piece came out. It really captures like the high fantasy vibes that I was going for. I think that I definitely improved in some areas over the course of working on this and problem solving and researching some things like kind of as I went. And yeah, I think it's gonna be a good gift from my partner. Overall, the biggest takeaway from this piece is that it was really fun to work on. It was very relaxing. I've really just been so caught up in digital art that I haven't had an opportunity to get my hands like into some actual paint recently, so I had a lot of fun doing that. So if you would like to see more content like this where I get out of my comfort zone and I get just real squirmy and real self-critical and do more traditional art stuff, please let me know in the comments. Thank you so much for watching this video, especially since again it's a little different from my normal content. I really appreciate your eyeballs being on this project out of all of the options that you have. As always, the biggest thank you for this video and every single one of my videos goes to my illustrious patrons, and especially my executive producers.
John Hart, Miss Furnace, Koichucks, Becca, Mandolin, Cyrus Orion, Jenny Craftsma, Molly Fanton, I Do TKD, Bend Off the Yellow, Cloud Max, Marita Wasner, Villy Smelly, Stabby Horse, Be He Be on My GBs Till I Ember Creeps, Cardia X, Christina Kimtia Art, Call Me Ash, Lunira, Fiasco, Mossy Raven, A Ruler, Ha Get It, I'm not saying that name on the internet, ABW Makes, Iskavan, A Wendu, Liana, Ermler Jean, Brian, Phoenix, PNG Not Found, Freedom and Gus Gus, Cat, Dodo, Zyle S, Agent Sketchy, Thea Maia, Lovisa, Eloquent Silence, Hypnos, Katie, Sweet Winter Garden, Gravity Drop, I Hang Out with Cats at Parties, and Bean the Bread.